Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome Yves Potvin from Canada. Welcome, Yves.
Good morning.
No worries. Now, Yves, today's subject, the church and the state, the relationship between the church and the state. And this is obviously an area that you're keenly interested in because I see the relationship between the church and the state as one of actually placing a moral, or if you like, an ethical position. Um, there were different courts. There were different courts. One was of equity, a court of equity, and that was where even if laws didn't actually say something was wrong, in the court of equity they could be still considered reprehensible. And I think that's a very important phenomena that we've actually lost sight of, because I believe the participation of the church in the area political is now almost null and void. Eves.
Yes, I. It's a good point right there. The relationship between the church and the state, the church and the governments, really,
Uh-huh.
the relationship. They were always told the church. You got to separate the church from the government. They have nothing to do with each other. The church should never get involved in the government stuff.
Hmm.
So I like to agree with that 100 plus percent because yes, they shouldn't get involved into the administrative justice the justice system and so on and so forth. But they have one thing that they have to do is they have to keep the government in line with God's law
Okay.
when it comes to justice. When it comes to
Hmm.
because governments represent the people. So if they
Hmm.
represent the people want certain things. They want justice. They want the good schools and so on and so forth. And if the government deviates from that, then the church really has to get the people involved into, uh, you know, intermingling with the government, fix them up, take, do the right thing in the government at the government level, so that we have all these good things for us. We have a
Hmm.
constitution, and there's a reason for that.
Hmm.
And the people should be made aware of that those laws that protects them, and therefore the people are in charge of the government. Really, the government only governs, but they're supposed to listen to the people.
Yeah.
That's basically what happens. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but that's basically what my
I
philosophy.
know that it. That's right. I know that that's what's supposed to happen. I don't think it actually is happening. I think that the government more or less treats the community in it from a point of contempt, and they do whatever they want. And it's what can they get away with? And of course, you've got the whole bureaucracy. But probably more important is you've actually got the press. And the press, of course, is such a hugely influential organisation, because the press just doesn't include the printed press, although that's a significant part. It includes the radio, the television. It also includes, if you like, the influence that perhaps seminaries have over the priests, or university seats, university chairs have over those who are being educated. And so it's actually a huge influence that has over community and has over society in general. But most importantly, the press has a huge influence over the government. And it's fascinating how disproportionate the power of the press is over government. And I notice how politicians will jump to their tune every time, and yet the church is silent. And yet, in actual fact, to me, the very position that the church should have is what the media has usurped. They should be in their boots and all advising about, if you like, natural law and the very nature of how things work, of how people work. Eves.
Yes, I can bring you back to point out the year of the early 70s.
Mhm.
We had the late 60s, early 70s, when we had uh, the separation of Quebec eminent, and
Okay, yeah.
there was a kind of they even murdered some people, and they had some
Mm,
mafia people involved, and so on and so forth. But the Quebecers wanted to well, most of them wanted to separate, or a good portion of them. It's only on some of the work that we did that cut it to a close. It was really a close vote.
mhm,
By the time we did the referendum, it was very close because we flooded Quebec with our leaflets that we didn't
mhm,
want to separate. It's like a
mhm,
marriage. It's like a marriage. There's 10 provinces, and we're all together in this, and so on and so forth.
mhm,
Now, coming back to Trudeau, who was the prime minister at the time, uh, Prime Minister Trudeau had studied communism. He was
mhm,
a over the top communism. He was a
mhm,
lawyer, a very smart lawyer, and
mhm,
uh, so what he did was he was against the separation of Quebec too,
mhm.
which would surprise a lot of people because
Yeah,
if he's an elite or he's a communist and so on and so forth, he wasn't in favor of communism. He wasn't in favor of the separation of Quebec, only for a different reason than we did. We didn't
yeah.
want to break the marriage, but he wanted all 10 provinces to be communists.
Oh, okay, righto, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the difference.
Mhm,
And since then, we've lost a lot of the church and state relationship, you might add, because
mhm,
communism means that you've got no God, you've got no church,
mm, mhm.
everything. Stay out of our business, kind of thing. Yet,
Yeah,
it's the people of the country that are suffering from this.
mhm.
So it was a very bad time, and Mr. Trudeau, hopefully, he'll spend some good time up there. But the problem is that everybody followed in his step. They followed including the Bank of Canada, all these
Mhm.
problems that came after that, the control
Yeah,
of the state
yeah.
over the country.
Mhm,
So basically, that's what backed us up quite a lot. So a lot of the Quebecer today are, they're Quebecers. They think they've got a country there, and
mhm.
unfortunately, we've lost a lot of our Catholics in Quebec, and it's down to about the practice of Catholicism in Quebec is barely, uh, I would say, 5 to 10%. It used to
Oh,
be it
oh.
used to be the whole the province, the most Catholic province.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's what they did in Russia. Russia was the same many years ago,
Yeah.
over a century ago, and they've won their fight there in the communist idea, the red Russia and red China and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So they became under a communist regime from there.
Yeah.
They didn't in Quebec. In Canada, they didn't call it communism. It's just
Mm.
today's capitalism. They've vitiated that word so bad that
Yeah.
people think that this is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I noted in a something I was talking to a person the other day in regard to the nexus. I call it the nexus, the coming together of communism and capitalism, and both are, if you like, a tyranny. Both rely on the dominance hierarchy, and that is ultimately there is a small elite at the top, or even an individual at the very top, who controls everything. And below that is the junta, and then of course the armed services which enforce it, KGB, whatever, Stasi, whatever you want to call them. You can call them CIA or Mossad or ASIO in Australia, whatever, the secret police who are behind everything. And and of course, under this dominance hierarchy, capitalism and communism, they sit quite comfortably together. And that's to me it's quite frustrating because the meaning of words confuses people, and they don't necessarily recognise if you turn around you say liberal, and in Canada I believe a liberal would maybe considered a socialist. In Australia, a liberal would be considered a conservative. and so the two words have different meanings in different countries, and I think it actually confuses it. But you talk about tyranny. Tyranny, essentially a dictatorship or a totalitarian regime. To me, there is no difference between the between what's going on. If, for instance, in America at the moment, to me that's totalitarian. The president certainly doesn't run the country. I think Congress does the work of what I would describe as the military-industrial complex. And of course, behind the military-industrial complex is the media, and ultimately, of course, it's the big banks. They control the whole lot. Is America a communist country? You ask yourself, well, with these surveillance systems that they're actually running in America, with the deep state that's actually controlling it, you look at the Chinese social, what they call social credit, which is the monitoring and evaluation system in China. To me, there's not much different. If it's Google or it's Facebook or it's CIA keeping an eye on you, or if it's in China, they call it social credit keeping an eye on you, it's still the totalitarian state. And so I have no issue with describing both those regimes, both capitalist and communist, as being tyrants, tyrannical regimes. But bringing us back to the relationship between the church and the state, and I think it's interesting in Russia today, and it really, I believe Russia is still a Soviet country. I believe it's still a communist country, but it's presenting this image that Putin might be a good bloke. Certainly through some of the websites and that Russia Today and Inside Russia and whatever, there's others there as well. They present Putin as being halfway reasonable and rational, and he's allowing a certain amount of freedom within the orthodoxy, the church in Russia. But I still see it as a government-controlled institution. It's not independent and it's not free speaking. And if it was free speaking and criticised the administration over issues, I'm sure the rug would be pulled out of it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Yves.
Yes, I was reading a paragraph into our the 10 sessions, and the Pope Pius XI wrote an encyclical called Quadragesimo Anno, and and he talks about the social credit idea. He doesn't mention social credit, and so the banks, the elites, they're not sitting around doing anything. They took the word social credit and they, like they did with many other words, they vitiated the word social credit. Meaning the Chinese social credit, the social credit party, and some of the first rules in the C.H. Douglas's writings is that you should never, it would be a disaster if you made social credit a party. And we saw that in the late 40s and so on and so forth. Somebody trying to make a party broke the rules right away. So they destroyed the idea of social credit for many years and to many people. So a lot of people are still confused over the whole thing. But the encyclicals were written. Social credit is a very good. There was 9 theologians. I think we mentioned that before. But there was 9 theologians that were ordered, I guess, or told or asked to study the social credit idea.
Okay.
Is it socialism? Is it communism? Please do. So they studied this social credit idea and passed it back on to us and to the church, and they ended up with a result of there is no taint of socialism or communism. So social credit would be a great thing for the people. So there's a story behind that. But you know what? We go back many centuries where popes have denounced the banking system. We can go back as far as 1311. That's before my time and your time.
Just a bit, yeah.
Pope Clement V He declared null and void all secular legislation in favor of usury, and those
Yeah.
that did were condemned as heretics. So in those days, you
Okay.
know what they did with heretics.
Mhm. Mm.
In 1745, we have Benedict the 14th, who wrote uh, Vix Prevenit. Now, Vix Prevenit is not in the social doctrine of the church. It's an encyclical.
Okay.
But Vix
Mm.
Prevenit was lost somehow in the works because it mentioned no level of interest is acceptable by the church.
Mhm.
So they took that, and eventually the church kind of accepted 5% maximum, which
Mhm.
doesn't make any sense. You're not supposed to charge any interest. It's because it doesn't calculate right. It's not right away. It's not
Mhm.
a good calculation. But and then you go on to 1836. Gregory the 16th. He extended Vix Prevenit
Mhm.
to denounce it, and he denounced it as a sin. It's in the encyclical 1891, Leo the 13th. That was the our modern times encyclicals.
Yeah.
Even though it's 1891, that was the start. And Leo the 13th wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum. It's an
Yep.
encyclical, the usury condemned by the church, which means
Mhm.
interest in 1931, 40 years later. Uh, Pope Pius XI wrote a Quadragesimo Anno, and this is the one that I just read to you in the book, and
Mhm.
so that everybody has a share of God's creation.
Mhm.
Pope Pius XII, Pope John the 23rd, John Paul II, Benedict the 16th, even Pope Francis wrote many. They didn't all write encyclicals, but they went on the radio and did these speeches. I don't know how they got through it because if the elites had got control of that, they would have stopped them right away. But a lot of
Mhm.
different things from the church that tells the people this is what your government is supposed to do for you.
Yeah.
So get up and go tell. But there is a big control in the state and the government, and which is the media and uh, money and everything in between.
Mhm.
So it's a tough thing, but we still have to fix the financial system because if the
Yeah.
financial system runs all those things, whether it be abortion, euthanasia, or I just heard autism was going to be cut off, hospitals, anything. We
Mhm.
have to achieve social credit. Otherwise, we won't keep going. It'll be impossible because the money system is running everything. So every time you
Mm.
talk to somebody, they're controlled basically by their money, the money system.
Mhm.
Modern
Mm.
slaves, modern slaves are not in chain; they're in debt.
That's right. I completely agree with that. That's exactly right. I'm just going to cut across to a couple of websites I've brought up on the ALOR library, and that is this one, Quadragesimo Anno, and also the Rerum Novarum, and you'll find them both under encyclicals on the ALOR library. So if you're looking for them, you'd have no trouble going to the Catholic Church and finding them. But I made a point of placing them here under the encyclicals because I think that they're so important, and they do bring out some profound thinking by our religious leaders, if you like, and especially in this case in the Roman Church. And I know that other churches have written about it and spoken about it, or at least other religious people have written about it. And to me, this is the issue that okay, financial system is weaponized. People are held in chains. The chains are of debt, and they can't get out of it. So it's a form of slavery, and of course in that becomes, if you like, the value of life is so low that We look at abortion, we look at infanticide, we look at senility, we look at the medical system. In this case, is cutting off support for certain things. It just goes on and on and on. And I noted in Australia there are several people who've been sacked for their particular points of view. They've spoken their points of view through social media. One bloke was sacked from a university as a long-standing 40-year professor. Another bloke was sacked from rugby. Another person was sacked from the public service because they had a particular point of view. And so what it means is that the position, if you like, of domination is one where there doesn't come into account ethics. It's anything that you might be opposed to that may be people can get at you as a consequence of it. They will, and so now it gets to the state of, if you like, fascism, another form of totalitarianism, where the employer can dominate your thought process, and they can threaten your personal security, your income, your family's well-being, simply because you have a point of view that they find intolerable. Yves.
Well, it's mind-boggling because the church itself, within itself, has problems.
Mm-hmm.
At the Catholic level, Christian level, we pray for these things to be fixed all the time. But there is one thing you may have noticed in Africa, for example, in the countries close to Africa, Europe, and all that, the group that is part of the church to work with the social doctrine of the church, kind of thing, is called Justice and Peace. Okay, it's a committee that's formed by the church by I believe John Paul II, and they talk about everything that has to do with helping people. So they have kind of a social doctrine within that, justice and peace. But in Canada, in the Western world, they don't call it justice and peace. They call it development and peace. Now, this is my own site. I've always wondered, why did they call it development and peace? And in other countries, it's justice and peace. What's going on? So development and peace is because it's a developed country, I guess, and they just don't want to alarm people. But in all the magazines that the church, the Catholic Church, they put out a magazine every month or every, I don't know when they put it out. I hardly can read it because it's about how nice these people are, and I look, they've been in the committee here in the CWL or Knights of Columbus for 30 years. It's all about celebrating each other, kind of thing. But the magazines never talk about the economic part of the government or our world amongst the citizen. There's nothing to talk about. They talk about raising money for the poor. They talk about we got to donate this, donate that. I know people need money, but instead of doing that, why don't they denounce the injustice that's being done right now at our government level? That's the thing that really boggles my mind, because now you have the church and the state, or the church and the government. Why does the church try to tell the government in some ways to fix the financial system? So the popes, all the popes, like John Paul II especially, the elites hated when he stood up and started to talk to the world about the economy. They says, "Oh, we got to shut him up. We got to do this. We got to do that." So, yes, the church and the state's relationship, we're going to stay out of the administrative part, but you better listen to the people. They're the ones that you work for. We put you up there not for your career, your advancement in your career. We put you there to help the people. We'll pay you well for what you do. But please, practice justice. That's
Mm.
basically what it is.
Yeah, yeah, no, that to me is so important. I get concerned with the if you like, the the temptation that's there for the church, and that is the charitable status that, of course, that they're exempt from tax. I think it's a huge temptation, and I know that the people who are working in the church, um, as adults, as parents of children, whatever, they're working in the church, and they have to wrestle harder and harder and harder to hold on to that charitable status because it would affect them financially so adversely. And I think, in a sense, it's at the point of um, almost of blackmail, almost of blackmail in order to hold on to that charitable status. That if you step outside the box, the threat of losing that charitable status is always there. Now, coming back to Scripture, the ethical position, if you like, the church and the state. Now, Jesus was shown a coin, and or he was actually asked a trick question: what, should we render unto Caesar and render unto God? And should we pay taxes? I think that's how it was. Should we pay taxes? And Jesus asked for the coin. Whose image is on the coin? And they said, well, it's Caesar's image. And he said, well, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but unto God the things that are God's. And so it places is a legitimacy on government, but it also says that in the coin that you've got to limit the power of government so there is opportunity, ample opportunity to render unto God the things that are God's. Now, to me, the clarifying point is the first commandment, the greatest commandment. What is the greatest commandment? Jesus was asked. And he said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. With all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. There's nothing left. If you're rendering unto God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, there is nothing left. And so that tells me quite clearly that government, while it is necessary, is only a very, very small part of what goes on with every human being. Incorrect relationship. Now, we talked before about tyranny, and let's place another word on the table: anarchy. Anarchy. When there is no government, there is no law, there is no nothing. You have, I'll get my hands into the picture, tyranny on one side, anarchy on the other side. That to me is what we've got to look at. Tyranny is totalitarianism, is capitalism, is communism. Anarchy is the other end of the scale where there is no government. Now, I put it to you that limited government, or limited constitutional monarchy, or limited constitutional republicanism is over here near anarchy. It is very close to anarchy. In other words, it's restricted. The powers of government should be very, very small, so that you are given all of this other to render unto God. Render unto God the things that are God's, but unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. To me, that's the explanation that is missing, and I'm not hearing it. And I should be hearing it because it's a profound position. And this to me is unfortunately what I mentioned before, the blackmail, if you like, the bribery that goes on in the holding of charitable status. It's to me, that whole thing is, why are they quiet? They're quiet because they're under threat. They're constantly under threat that they'll lose something that they dearly cherish. And then, of course, it comes to the hard question of you cannot serve God. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and mammon. And that holds as well to us as it does to any other individual. And the individuals that I'm talking about and to, of course, are anyone who's in a position of power, whether it's a politician, a bureaucrat, or whether it's a leader in an emissary, in a church, in a seminary, whether it's the actual administration in the church. All of those, you cannot serve God and mammon. It's got to be one or the other. So it really is a lightning bolt, a purification, if you like, a flame that challenges us all, so that we render unto God the things that are God's. Yves.
Yeah, you remind me of the saying by Clifford U. Douglas and Louis Evans reinforced it. Uh, Man wasn't made for systems. Systems was made for man.
That's
And,
right.
and man is at the top of all systems.
Hmm.
So we were serving a system. It's slavery, obviously, but the government get involved with our very life.
Yeah.
The I had a friend of mine who had a business doing in chemicals or something. She had to use chemicals or something like that. She had a little business,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
government they sent in their police and then invaded the place. They stayed there for like for 6 7 hours
Hmm.
in the day to show that she's doing everything wrong. It's her own
Hmm.
business. She's been doing this for years,
Hmm.
and my friend there, who's in the, he sells chemicals and mops and all that. He's got a little store,
Hmm.
and he's really mad at all this. He's
Hmm.
really upset because he has to put up with all this stuff, and it's something that we've got to get up and say, this is wrong. You shouldn't do this.
Hmm.
You don't have to treat the police that comes in. You don't have to shoot him, but you have to explain to him. And if he doesn't want to listen, he'll have to walk away or something. But
Hmm.
the whole government is they're starting to put out these guys, tax what do you call it, the tax inspector or whatever. They go into
Hmm.
businesses now more and more to get some
Hmm.
income back because a lot of people are not paying their tax. They say they're invading their tax. They're invading paying taxes.
Avoiding.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you know what? I hate to say this, but I encourage them
Mm.
when they want to avoid taxes. I encourage them because
Mm.
they don't. They're being robbed. They're being robbed
I know.
blind, and
Yeah.
so
No, I too would encourage individuals to minimise their tax that they pay. One is because what it does is it optimises their spending power for themselves, and I think that they're much wiser with their spending than the bureaucracy is. But the other is that the law is there to be abided by, but the law also must be just and equitable. And we're talking about the financial system as essentially enslaving us, and that's quite deliberate. The government is in bed, if you like, with big business,
yes,
central banks, all that sort of stuff. And it's unfortunate because the voice that we should be hearing, we're not. And so it's up to the individuals in the churches, if you like, or out of the churches to speak against it. And the fact is that the courts of equity and ethics are not actually holding the bureaucracy and the, if you like, the administration to account. And to me, in the end, there has to be sufficient pressure coming from individuals and from the community that the government will again yield. But it has to there has to be sufficient pressure. I noted that the yellow vests in France, and they're going up to what, nearly 40 weeks, and of course the government is passing laws to make it more and more difficult for them to continue their campaign. But continue their campaign they must, because they otherwise they'll just be enslaved, and that's what their government is doing. And in Britain, with the Brexit, and I doubt that this new Prime Minister is going to do any better than the last or the last before that. They have no intention of leaving the EU because this is all part of the dominance hierarchy. This is part of the tyranny that's being imposed on them, and they're not going to let that go easily. So the people in Britain have got to work in front of them, and of course, with what's going on with United States, the terrible situations in United States with the shutting down of entire cities, and of course the infrastructure that's just collapsing because there's no more money to go there, and so of course the homeless are just numbers are increasing and increasing, and it really is frustrating because these things don't need to be. The fact is the financial system can be made to work. It has been made to work. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've read about it in our history books that it can actually work successfully, but it needs to be placed on an even keel, a place in equilibrium. And and if you like, if the words of the encyclicals need to be restated from every street corner in order to wrestle this through, then so be it. It's up to the individuals in community to do that. They have to do the work that's needed to spread the good news. The good news is that the Sabbath was made for man. The system was made for man, not man for the system. Finance is a man-made, man-conceived, and I might add, a man-manipulated system. And it's not made to serve, and it can be, it should be, and in the end it must be. Yves.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm.
It's we're gonna do something pretty soon. Our meeting in September,
Mm-hmm.
around the end of September, we have our session, and we're expecting quite a lot of people from different parts of the world. South
Oh, beautiful.
America, a lot from Africa.
Yeah.
Provided they get their visa. That's the problem that they have, Africa,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
get their visa on time or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're getting a lot of people from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
maybe from Australia. We'll,
Mm.
so it's something that we hope that's going to go well, and we can reinforce these points
Mm-hmm.
when we're there, and
Mm.
hopefully they're going to have some kind of a good report at the end.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to help with that, but I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Excellent, excellent. I'm just mindful of the time, Eves. We're at the, believe it or not, the 37-minute mark. This is
It's
the
not
longest
possible.
forum. This is the longest forum we've done, and I honestly feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
The church and the state, the relationship between the church and the state. Your closing comments, please, Eve.
I would like to let the people know that are listening to this. There's nothing wrong with uh, the church telling the people that the government is not doing justice to the world, and we probably already know that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we really think about it, maybe we can reinforce it within ourselves and our families and our communities, and eventually our municipalities, and maybe we can spread the word. A word basically that's like your commandment of God there: love God with
Mm-hmm.
all your heart, with all your mind, and but love your neighbor as yourself. That's
That's right.
one commandment that He left us, and that's all I can say right now. I'm not trying to be a preacher or anything like that, but that's what I believe in basically.
Mm-hmm. No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for that, Eves. I'll just remind our viewers that on the ALOR website in the library, you'll find those two encyclicals. I've made a point of putting them up there, but I would also recommend to you that the encyclicals are all available. You just have to do a search, and the Roman Church has got them all for you. They're like thousands and thousands of the encyclicals of the deep thinking that the leaders of the church have gone through, that our if you like, our religious fathers have studied and argued and debated. And I know that, if you like, they say the Athanasian Creed, I read the other day, a couple of months back on that, they were still arguing the Athanasian Creed right through from the time of Christ to after the year 500. The creed didn't come into effect until they had finally settled it, and it wasn't until after the year 500 AD. So this is a 500-year debate to clarify these things as to the nature of God, and it is the same with with the encyclicals, in that you need to study them, you need to read them, you need to have reinforce them, and contact your, if you like, your religious leaders to debate the issue, to have open forums in discussion, because these to me are the tools that will help us all understand what it is to bring about God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. This is Arnis Luks and Yves Potvin. Thank you again, Yves.
Thank you, Ernest.
No worries. We'll catch you later, ladies and